Hi and welcome to the channel. Today we will build another SFF PC, which won the votes in my poll, the DeepCool CH160. I bought this at an expensive price, but it is usually available at 3,000 pesos or $51 US. As for the specs, it can fit an ITX motherboard, a 172mm cooler, a 305 by 138 by 65mm or 3-slot GPUs. It can also accommodate up to 4 fans. However, for its total volume of 19 liters, it only has mount for one 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drive or a front fan. Anyway, upon opening the box, you'd see the case padded by a thick foam. It has a resealable accessories packet, and this is the case itself. As for the accessories, it has a manual, a bunch of zip ties, and a bunch of screws. That's it. As for the case, obviously it has a handle, and the layout is similar to traditional ATX cases. It has a glass side panel, mesh at top, mesh at front, and holes at the back. There are also some holes on the right side panel for PSU intake. As for I/O, it has power switch, 2 USB 3, 1 USB-C, and audio combo jack. To remove the side panels, there are 2 screws on each side. As for the top panel, you can remove it as well. You'd notice a screwdriver icon. Anyway, the top panel also has 2 screws on each side. At the front of the case, they have this so-called multifunctional stand. This can mount a fan, a 2.5-inch drive, or a 3.5-inch drive, but not all simultaneously. Anyway, the case has pre-installed dust filters on the top, bottom, and front. Those are also removable, which is nice. As for the cables inside, there is a loose extension cable. However, I didn't see any mount for it at the back. Moving on, there's front panel switches, USB 3, USB-C, and front panel audio. I also noticed this edge, and as mentioned in my previous video, it's likely intended for the Assassin 4. The Assassin 4 extends over ITX motherboards, so this extra space is necessary to accommodate it. Anyway, I took a closer look at the manual to see what this case offers. The case offers some flexibility in PSU mounting options. You can mount it at the front or by default on the side. However, if you choose to mount it at the front, it may obstruct installation of the front fan, so keep that in mind. Although the manual didn't mention the extension cable, it will likely end up positioned here, dangling. Anyway, moving on with the build, I'll be using the Asus ROG B650E-I motherboard. The processor is a Ryzen 7 7800X3D. RAM is G.Skill Trident Z5 Neo, 32GB, 6000 megatransfers, CL30 RAM. And the cooler is the DeepCool AK620 Digital White. Anyway, I also removed the side front panel switches. I think this will block the GPU installation later on. Going back to the motherboard, I pre-plugged the 4-pin CPU power connector as I thought that it will be hard to reach later on. I also plugged in a Y splitter in the CPU fan pins, which will contain the CPU fan and the rear fan, and then plug the CPU cooler fan to the splitter. I plugged another fan splitter for this motherboard. I don't really need to do this now since the pins are at the top and it is accessible even after installing the motherboard to the case. However, I also think that we should plug other cables now as everything will be hard to reach once the motherboard is installed to the case. To plug the 24-pin power cable, I removed the front fan of the cooler first and then plugged the 24-pin to the motherboard. I then clipped back the fan to the cooler. I also reoriented the motherboard so that there will be less twist while installing the motherboard to the case. Anyway, plug the USB-C, front panel switches, USB 3, and lastly the front panel audio, and then screw the motherboard to the case. As for the PSU, I'll be using the FSP Dagger Pro 850 watts gold power supply. Plug the cables to the PSU first and then screw the PSU to the case. Looking at this layout, you can actually reach the CPU power connector here, which is nice. Anyway, I removed the CPU power connector first and rerouted it to the sides and then to the top. I then proceed to screw the fan to the multifunctional stand in a non-conventional way. While the orientation of the fan is correct, the stand should be outside this edge. Anyway, I screwed the multifunctional stand to the case. I also made sure that the fan cable is facing upwards. Plug the front fan to a Y splitter, install a top front fan. For now, I installed it in intake mode, thinking that it will be beneficial for the CPU. But I also tested it in exhaust mode, just to be sure. I then plugged the extension cable and turned on the PSU. Again, it will have a tail. Install the rear fan and plug the fan to the fan splitter. I then pushed every cable to the left side of the case. I tried to see if I can close the top panel, and luckily I can. Next is to remove the PCIe covers. For the GPU that I used, I only need to remove 2 slots. As for the GPU, I'll be using the Gigabyte RTX 4070 Ti Super Gaming OC. For this case, as it is traditional layout, you can just drop it here. But before I do that, I plug the 16-pin power connector first, clear up the messy cables, and then drop the GPU to the PCIe slot. Screw the GPU baffle to the case, screw back the front panel I/O, and as for the messy cables, I velcro tied them so that it is not that messy, and tuck it below. If you're here for a long time already, you know that I really don't care about cable management. I'm doing this to ensure that the fans will not hit any cables. And then tuck the 16-pin power connector as well. Screw the top panel, screw the left side panel. As for the glass side panel, I wasn't able to secure it first, so I loosened the fan mount a bit and then installed the glass panel. Screw the tempered glass to the case, and it's time to test this. I tested this in 3 configurations, with 2 intakes and 1 exhaust, with 2 intakes and 2 exhaust, and with 1 intake and 3 exhaust. As for the CPU temps while benchmarking Cinebench R23 and R24 for 30 minutes, it averaged at 84.3 degrees Celsius and 80.55 degrees Celsius respectively. It also had a max temp of 86 degrees Celsius and 82 degrees Celsius respectively. As for the temps while benchmarking FF15 in 4K for 30 minutes, the CPU temps averaged at 64.73 degrees Celsius in a 2 intake 2 exhaust configuration. In contrast, the CPU temps averaged at 67.44 degrees Celsius in a 1 intake 3 exhaust configuration, making the 2 intake 2 exhaust configuration approximately 2 degrees Celsius cooler. As for the GPU temps, it averaged at 70.28 degrees Celsius in a 2 intake 2 exhaust configuration. In a 1 intake 3 exhaust configuration, the GPU temps averaged at 66.77 degrees Celsius, making the 1 intake 3 exhaust config approximately 3 degrees Celsius cooler. This is the inverse of what we observed with the CPU temperatures. As for the GPU hotspot temps and fan speeds, both scaled linearly. As for FF15 in 1080p, which would simulate high FPS gaming, the difference wasn't significant. The CPU was just 1 degree Celsius hotter compared to when running in 4K. As for the right configuration, this will depend on the CPU cooler you use. For a tall cooler such as the AK620, having an intake top front fan makes sense as it will blow fresh air directly onto the CPU rather than creating turbulence. If you have a low profile cooler, I would suggest configuring both top rear and top front fans as exhaust. In other words, a 1 intake 3 exhaust config. Generally, in my opinion, this is the better configuration as it will also cool the GPU more effectively, which is my priority over the CPU. As for the dislikes to this case, well, DeepCool didn't specify what kinds of fans would work, whether slim or thick fans. I think they should provide clear guidelines on this. However, based on testing, for the top fans, it is safer to install slim fans at the top rear and take a chance that regular fans will fit at the top front of the case. Another issue is the lack of cable management options. In this case, messy cables will be visible unlike in some ITX cases where cables are tightly managed or there is no tempered glass to expose them. I would also like a removable bottom panel for easy GPU installation. For a 19-liter case, which is quite large, its compatibility is meh. I was surprised to see that it is only compatible with one 2.5-inch drive or one 3.5-inch drive or one front fan, but not all simultaneously. Additionally, there's no official radiator support and the maximum GPU length is just 305mm. While this is acceptable for a sub 15-liter case, it is worth noting for a 19-liter case. I also don't know what to think about the extension cable tail. It feels like an afterthought rather than an intentional design feature. It's like a super saiyan. As for my likes in this case, I like that it comes with a bundled front panel switch. Despite the lack of radiator compatibility, it compensates with compatibility for larger air coolers. While I mentioned quite a few negative aspects, I still recommend this case because of its price. At 3,000 pesos, it is relatively affordable and every negative comment I made can be overlooked because of this. The cooling performance isn't bad either, especially considering that we tested it with a 4070 Ti Super and a 7800X 3D. Definitely a good gaming rig. However, if you are looking for excellent airflow and compatibility, my top recommendation would always be the Mushroom S. But you could buy around 3 DeepCool CH160 cases for the price of one Mushroom S. Anyway, that's it for this video. Do let me know in the comments below on what you think of this case. Thanks for watching. Do like or dislike and subscribe for more unboxing, SFF builds, and benchmarks. Bye!